In the right key one can say anything. In the wrong key, nothing. The only delicate part is the establishment of the key. George Bernard Shaw. One of the best ways to become aware of the astonishing diversity of human reactions is to speak to a group of people. You can't help noticing how differently people react to the same thing. You tell a motivational story, and one person will be transfixed, another bored to tears. You tell a joke, and one person howls while another doesn't move a muscle. You'd think each person was listening in a different mental language. The question is why people react so differently to identical messages. Why does one person see the glass as half empty and another see it as half full? Why does one person hear a message and feel energized, excited, and motivated while another hears the exact same message and doesn't respond at all? Shaw's quote is precisely right. If you address someone in the right key, you can do anything. If you address him in the wrong one, you can do nothing. The most inspiring message, the most insightful unlimited power thought, the most intelligent critique are absolutely meaningless unless they're understood both intellectually and emotionally by the person to whom they're being addressed. They're major keys not just to personal power, but to many of the broader issues we must confront collectively. If you want to be a master persuader, a master communicator, in both business and in personal life, you have to know how to find the right key. The path is through metaprograms. Metaprograms are the keys to the way a person processes information. They're powerful internal patterns that help determine how he forms his internal representations and directs his behavior. Metaprograms are the internal programs, or thoughts we use in deciding what to pay attention to. We distort, delete, and generalize information because the conscious mind can only pay attention to so many pieces of information at any given time. Our brain processes information much the way a computer does. It takes fantastic amounts of data and organizes them into a configuration that makes sense to that person. A computer can't do anything without software, which provides the structure to perform specific tasks. Metaprograms operate much the same way in our brain. They provide the structure that governs what we pay attention to, how we make sense of our experiences, and the directions in which they take us. They provide the basis on which we decide that something is interesting or dull, a potential blessing or a potential threat. To communicate with a computer, you have to understand its software. To communicate effectively with a person, you have to understand his metaprograms. People have patterns of behavior, and they have patterns by which they organize their experience to create those behaviors. Only through understanding those mental patterns can you expect to get your message across, whether it's trying to get someone to buy a car or to understand that you really love him/her. Even though the situations may vary, there is a consistent structure to how people understand things and organize their thinking. The first metaprogram involves moving towards something or moving away. All human behavior revolves around the urge to gain pleasure or avoid pain. You pull away from a lighted match in order to avoid the pain of burning your hand. You sit and watch a beautiful sunset because you get pleasure from the glorious celestial show as day glides into night. The same is true of more ambiguous actions. One person may walk a mile to work because he enjoys the exercise. Another may walk because he has a terrible phobia about being in a car. One person may read Faulkner, Hemingway, or Fitzgerald because he enjoys their prose and insight. He's moving towards something that gives him pleasure. Another might read the same writers because he doesn't want people to think of him as an uneducated dunce. He's not so much seeking pleasure as avoiding pain, he's moving away from something, not toward it. As with the other metaprograms I'll discuss, this process is not one of absolutes. Everyone moves towards some things and away from others. No one responds the same way to each and every stimulus, although everyone has a dominant mode, a strong tendency toward one program or another. Some people tend to be energetic, curious risk takers. They may feel most comfortable moving towards something that excites them. Others tend to be cautious, wary, and protective. They see the world as a more perilous place. They tend to take actions away from harmful or threatening things rather than toward exciting ones. To find out which way people move, ask them what they want in a relationship, a house, car, job, or anything else. Do they tell you what they want or what they don't want? What does this information mean? Everything. If you're a businessman selling a product, you can promote it two ways, by what it does or by what it doesn't do. You can try to sell cars by stressing that they're fast, sleek, or sexy, or you can emphasize that they don't use much gas, don't cost much to maintain, and are particularly safe in crashes. The strategy you use should depend entirely upon the strategy of the person you're dealing with. Use the wrong metaprogram with a person, and you might as well have stayed home. You're trying to move him towards something, and all he wants to do is find a good reason to back away. Remember, a car can travel along the same path in forward or reverse. It just depends on what direction it's facing. The same is true on a personal basis. Let's say you want your child to spend more time on his schoolwork. You might tell him, you better study or you won't get into a good college. Or, look at Fred. He didn't study, so he flunked out of school, and he's going to spend the rest of his life pumping gas. Is that the kind of life you want for yourself? How well will that strategy work? It depends on your child. If he's primarily motivated by moving away, it might work well. But what if he moves toward things? What if he's motivated by things that excite him, by moving toward things he finds appealing? If that's how he responds, you're not going to change his behavior by offering the example of something to move away from. You can nag until you're blue in the face, but you're talking in the wrong key. You're talking Latin, and the kid understands Greek. You're wasting your time, and you're wasting his. In fact, people who move toward are often angered by or resentful of those who present things to be moved away from. You would motivate your child better by saying, if you do this, you can pick and choose any college you want to. The second metaprogram deals with external and internal frames of reference. Ask someone else how he knows when he's done a good job. For some people, the proof comes from outside. The boss pats you on the back and says your work was great. You get a raise. You win a big award. Your work is noticed and applauded by your peers. When you get that sort of external approval, you know your work is good. That's an external frame of reference. For others, the proof comes from inside. They just know inside when they've done well. If you have an internal frame of reference, you can design a building that wins all sorts of architectural awards, but if you don't feel it's special, no amount of outside approval will convince you it is. Conversely, you might do a job that gets a lukewarm reception from your boss or peers, but if you feel it's good work, you'll trust your own instincts rather than theirs. That's an internal frame of reference. Let's say you're trying to convince someone to attend a seminar. You might say, you've got to attend the seminar. It's great. I've gone and all my friends have gone, and they've all had a terrific time and raved about it for days. They all said it changed their lives for the better. If the person you're talking to has an external frame of reference, chances are you'll convince him. If all those people say it's true, he'll often assume it's probably true. But what if he has an internal frame of reference? You'll have a difficult time convincing him by telling him what others have said. It doesn't mean anything to him. It doesn't compute. You can only convince him by appealing to things he knows himself. What if you told him, remember the series of lectures you went to last year? Remember how you said it was the most insightful experience you'd had in years? Well, I know about something that's maybe like that. I think if you check it out, you may find you'll have the same kind of experience. What do you think? Will that work? Sure it will, because you're talking to him in his language. It's important to note that all these metaprograms are context and stress related. If you've done something for 10 or 15 years, you probably have a strong internal frame of reference. If you're brand new, you may not have as strong an internal frame of reference about what is right or wrong in that context. So you tend to develop preferences and patterns over time. But even if you're right-handed, you still use your left hand in various situations where it is useful to do so. The same is true of metaprograms. You're not just one way. You can vary. You can change. What kind of frame of reference do most leaders have, internal or external? A truly effective leader has to have a strong internal frame. He wouldn't be much of a leader if he spent all his time asking people what they thought of something before he took any action. And, as with metaprograms, there's an ideal balance to be struck. Remember, few people operate strictly at one extreme. A truly effective leader has to be able to take in information effectively from the outside as well. When he doesn't, leadership becomes megalomania. After one of my recent seminars open to guests, a man came up with 3 friends and sternly told me, "I'm not sold." He was doing everything he could to egg me on. It quickly became obvious he was sorting by an internal frame of reference. Externally oriented people rarely come up and just tell you what you should do and how you should do it. And from his conversation with his friends, it also became clear that he moved away from things. So I told him, I can't convince you to do anything. You're the only one who can convince you. He didn't know how to handle this response. He was waiting for me to strut my stuff and have him reject it. Now he had to agree with what I said, because he knew it was true inside. Then I said, "You're the only person who knows who would lose if you didn't attend the course." Normally such a remark would have sounded terrible to me. But I was speaking in his language, and it worked. Notice, I didn't say he would lose if he didn't attend. If I'd said that, he never would have. Instead I said, "You're the only one who knows, internal frame of reference, who would lose, moving away from if you didn't go." He said, "Yeah, that's true," and he went to the back of the room and signed up. Before I learned about metaprograms, I would have tried to persuade him by having him talk to other people, external frame of reference, who had taken the course, and I would have told him about all the benefits he would derive moving toward. But that would have been the way to get me interested, not him. The third set of metaprograms involves sorting by self or sorting by others. Some people look at human interactions primarily in terms of what's in it for them personally, some in terms of what they can do for themselves and others. Of course, people don't always fall into one extreme or the other. If you sort only by self, you become a self-absorbed egotist. If you sort only by others, you become a martyr. If you're involved in hiring people, wouldn't you want to know where an applicant fits on this scale? Not long ago, a major airline found that 95% of its complaints involved 5% of its employees. These 5% sorted strongly by self. They were most interested in looking out for themselves, not others. Were they poor employees? Yes and no. They were obviously in the wrong jobs and obviously doing a poor job, though they might have been smart, hardworking, and congenial. They may have been the right people put in the wrong slots. What did the airline do? It replaced them with people who sorted by others. The company determined this through group interviews in which prospective employees were asked why they wanted to work for the airline. Most of the individuals thought they were being judged by the answers they gave in front of the group, when in fact they were being judged by their behavior as members of the audience. That is, individuals who paid the most attention and gave the most eye contact, smiles, or support to the person who was doing the speaking at the front of the room were given the highest rating, while those who paid little or no attention and were in their own world while others were talking were considered to be primarily self-sorting and were not hired. The company's complaint ratio dropped over 80% as a result of this move. That's why metaprograms are so important in the business world. How can you evaluate a person if you don't know what motivates him? How can you match the job you have available with the correct person, in terms of required skills, ability to learn, and internal makeup? A lot of very smart people spend their careers totally frustrated because they're doing jobs that don't make the best use of their inherent capabilities. A liability in one context can be a valuable asset in another. In a service business, like an airline, you obviously need people who sort by others. If you're hiring an auditor, you might want someone who would sort by self. How many times have you dealt with someone who left you in a confused state because he did his job well intellectually but poorly emotionally? It's like a doctor who sorts strongly by self. He may be a brilliant diagnostician, but unless you feel he cares about you, he won't be totally effective. In fact, someone like that would probably be better off as a researcher than as a clinician. Putting the right person in the right job remains one of the biggest problems in American business. But it's a problem that could be dealt with if people knew how to evaluate the ways that job applicants processed information. At this point, it's worth noting that not all metaprograms are created equal. Are people better off moving toward things rather than away from them? Perhaps. Would the world be a better place if people sorted more by others and less by self? Probably. But we have to deal with life the way it is, not the way we wish it were. You may wish your son moved toward things rather than away. If you want to effectively communicate with him, you have to do it in a way that works, not in a way that plays to your idea of how the world should work. The key is to observe a person as carefully as possible, listen to what he says, what sort of metaphors he uses, what his physiology reveals. When he's attentive and when he's bored. People reveal their metaprograms on a consistent, ongoing basis. It doesn't take much concentrated study to figure out what people's tendencies are or how they are sorting at the moment. To determine if people sort by self or others, see how much attention they pay to other people. Do they lean toward people and have facial expressions that reflect concern for what others are saying, or do they lean back and remain bored and unresponsive? Everyone sorts by self some of the time, and it's important to do so sometimes. The key is what you do consistently and whether your sorting procedure enables you to produce the results you desire. The fourth sorting program involves matches and mismatches. I want to try an experiment with you. Look at these figures and tell me how they relate to each other. If I asked you to describe the relationship between the three figures, you could answer in many ways. You could say they're all rectangles. You could say they all have four sides. You could say two are vertical and one is horizontal, or that two are standing up and one is lying down, or that no one figure has precisely the same relationship to the other two. Or that one is different and the other two are alike. I'm sure you can think of more descriptions. What's going on here? They're all descriptions of the same picture, but they take completely different approaches. So it is with matches and mismatches. This metaprogram determines how you sort information to learn, understand, and the like. Some people respond to the world by finding sameness. They look at things and see what they have in common. They're matches. So when they look at our figures they might say, well, they're all rectangles. Another kind of matcher finds sameness with exceptions. He might look at the figures and say, they're all rectangles, but one is lying down and the other two are standing up. Other people are mismatchers, difference people. There are two kinds of them. One type looks at the world and sees how things are different. He might look at the figures and say they are all different and have different relationships to one another. They're not alike at all. The other kind of mismatcher sees differences with exceptions. He's like a matcher who finds sameness with exceptions in reverse. He sees the differences first, and then he'll add the things they have in common. To determine whether someone is a matcher or mismatcher, ask him about the relationship between any set of objects or situations and note whether he focuses first on the similarities or the differences. Can you imagine what happens when a sameness matcher gets together with a difference mismatcher? When the one says they're all alike, the other says, no, they're not, they're all different. The sameness person's rationale is that they're all rectangles. The difference mismatcher's rationale is that the thickness of the lines may not be exactly the same, or that the angles are not exactly the same in all three of them. So who's right? They both are, of course. It all depends on a person's perception. However, mismatches often have difficulty creating rapport with people because they are always creating differences. They can more easily develop rapport with other mismatches. How is understanding these distinctions important? Let me give an example from my business. I have 5 partners, and all but one of us are matches. For the most part, this is terrific. We're alike, so we like each other. We think the same way and see the same things, so in our meetings we can achieve a wonderful synergy. We're all talking and coming up with ideas, and they all look better and better because we're matching one another, seeing what the others are seeing, building on their insights, getting more and more excited. Until our mismatcher weighs in, that is. Without fail, he sees things differently from the way we do. While we see the way things fit together, he sees the way they don't. While we get enthusiastic and move along, he jumps in and tells us it's not going to work, then sits back like a bump on a log, not paying attention to what we see and instead seeing all sorts of problems we don't want to worry about. We want to soar into the mental ozone. He wants to get back to square one and say, oh, yeah. What about this? What about that? Is he a pain in the neck? You bet he is. Is he a valuable partner? He sure is. What we need to do is use him at the appropriate time in the planning process. We don't want him harping on details and ruining our brainstorming. The synergy we get from planning together is more valuable than his nitpicking at the time. Then after we've slowed down, we desperately need someone who sees the holes, sees the incongruities, sees how things don't fit, how they don't match. That's the function he plays, and it often saves us from ourselves. Mismatches are in the minority. The generalizations offered by surveys show that about 35% of the people interviewed were mismatches. If you're a mismatcher, you'll probably say the surveys are not accurate. However, mismatches are extremely valuable because they tend to see what the rest of us don't. Mismatches aren't usually the source of poetic inspiration. Many times, even when they get excited, they'll start mismatching and find a way to get unexcited. But their critical, analytical sensibilities are important to any business. Think of a titanic business failure like the movie Heaven's Gate. If you'd been able to look behind the scenes, you might have found a bunch of creative matches with internal frames of reference, all moving toward the goal and not looking at anything they need to move away from. They desperately needed a mismatcher to say, "Wait a second. What about this?" and communicate it in a way that could be accepted by the creative people's internal frames of reference. Matching or mismatching modes are extremely important because they can play out in so many ways, even in nutrition. Extreme matchers can often end up eating food that's bad for them, because they want food that is always the same. They wouldn't want an apple or a plum. There's too much variety in ripeness, texture, tastes, shelf time, and other assorted variables. Instead, they might eat a lot of junk food because it doesn't change. It might be lousy food, but it warms a matcher's unvarying soul. If you have a job that requires the same repetitive work, year after year, would you want to hire a different person? Of course not. You want to hire a sameness person. He'd be very, very happy in such a job for as long as you needed him there. If, however, you have a job that requires a great deal of flexibility or constant change, would you want to hire a sameness person in that position? Obviously not. These distinctions can be very useful in discovering what kind of jobs people would be most happy at for the longest period of time. Consider the case of a football field goal kicker. A few years back, he began the season with great success, kicking with remarkable accuracy. But since he was a mismatcher, he soon felt obligated to begin varying his routine, and he went into a slump. He was persuaded to concentrate on the different kinds of fans behind the goal post in each different stadium. By focusing on how different they were, he could mismatch to his heart's content on something trivial while still performing his best in the same way in what really mattered. Would you use the same persuasion techniques on a matcher and a mismatcher? Would you want them in the same job? Would you treat two kids with different matching strategies in the same way? Of course not. This is not to say that strategies are immutable. People are not Pavlovian dogs. They can modify their strategies to some extent, but only if someone talks to them in their own language about how to do that. It takes tremendous effort and patience to turn a lifelong mismatcher into a matcher, but you can help him make the most of his approach and be a little less churlish and doctrinaire in the process. That's one of the secrets of living with people who are different from you. On the other hand, it's useful for matchers to see more differences, for they have a tendency to generalize. It might be useful for a matcher to notice all the differences between this week and last week, or between the cities they visit, instead of saying Los Angeles is very much like New York. Focus a little on the differences, too. They are part of the spice of life. Can a matcher and a mismatcher live happily together? Sure, just as long as they understand each other. That way, when differences occur, they'll just realize the other person isn't bad or wrong, she just perceives things in a different way. You don't have to be totally alike to establish rapport. You do need to remember the differences in the ways you both perceive things and learn how to respect and appreciate each other. The next metaprogram involves what it takes to convince someone of something. The convincer strategy has two parts. To figure out what consistently convinces someone, you must first find out what sensory building blocks he needs to become convinced, and then you must discover how often he has to receive these stimuli before becoming convinced. To discover someone's convincer metaprogram, ask, how do you know when someone else is good at a job? Do you have to see them or watch them do it? B. Hear about how good they are, C. Do it with them, or D. Read about their ability? The answer may be a combination of these. You may believe someone's good when you see him do a good job and when other people tell you he's good. The next question is, how often does someone have to demonstrate he's good before you're convinced? There are four possible answers. A. Immediately, for example, if they demonstrate that they're good at something once, you believe them. B. A number of times, 2 or more. C. Over a period of time, say, a few weeks or a month or a year. And D. Consistently. In the last case, a person has to demonstrate that he's good each and every time. If you're the head of an organization, one of the most valuable states you can achieve with your key workers is trust and rapport. If they know you care about them, they'll work harder and better for you. If they don't trust you, they won't deliver for you. But part of establishing that trust is being attentive to the different needs of different people. Some people will establish a relationship and maintain it. If they know that you play fair and that you care about them, you can establish a bond that will last until you do something to betray it. This doesn't work for everyone. Some workers need more than that, whether it's a kind word, an approving memo, a show of public support, or an important task to perform. They may be just as loyal and just as talented, but they need more verification from you than other people do. They need more proof that the bond between you still holds. Likewise, any good salesman knows customers he only had to sell once, and they were customers forever. Other people have to see the product 2 or 3 times before they decide to buy, while for others maybe 6 months can pass before there is a need to sell to them again. Then of course there is the salesman's favorite, the man who has used your product for years, and every time you come in he wants to know again why he should use it. He has to be shown every time. The same process plays out with even greater intensity in personal relationships. With some people, if you can prove your love once, you've proved it forever. With others, you have to prove it every day. The value of understanding these metaprograms is that they provide you with the game plan for convincing someone. You know in advance what it will take to convince him, and you're no longer upset by the person you have to show every time. You expect that behavior from him. Another metaprogram is possibility versus necessity. Ask someone why he went to work for his present company or why he bought his current car or house. Some people are motivated primarily by necessity, rather than by what they want. They do something because they must. They're not pulled to take action by what is possible. They're not looking for infinite varieties of experience. They go through life taking what comes and what is available. When they need a new job or a new house or a new car or even a new spouse, they go out and accept what is available. Others are motivated to look for possibilities. They're motivated less by what they have to do than by what they want to do. They seek options, experiences, choices, paths. The person who is motivated by necessity is interested in what's known and what's secure. The person who is motivated by possibility is equally interested in what's not known. He wants to know what can evolve, what opportunities might develop. If you were an employer, which kind of a person would you most want to hire? Some people would probably answer, the person who is motivated by possibility. After all, having a rich sense of potential makes for a richer life. Instinctively, most of us, even a lot of people who are motivated by necessity, would advocate the virtues of remaining open to an infinite variety of new directions. In reality, it's not that cut and dried. There are jobs that require attention to detail, steadfastness, and consistency. Let's say you're a quality control inspector at an auto plant. A sense of possibility is nice. However, what you might need most is a sense of necessity. You need to know exactly what's needed, and you have to verify it's being done. Someone motivated by possibility would probably be bored stiff in a job like that, while someone motivated by necessity would feel perfectly attuned to it. People who are motivated by necessity have other virtues as well. Some jobs place a particular virtue on permanence. When you fill them, you want someone who'll last for a long time. A person motivated by possibilities is always looking for new options, new enterprises, new challenges. If he finds another job that seems to offer more potential, there's a good chance he'll leave. Not so the somewhat plodding soul who is motivated by necessity. He takes a job when he needs one. He sticks with it because working is a necessity of life. There are many jobs that cry out for a dreamy-eyed, swashbuckling, risk-taking believer in possibility. If your company were diversifying into a whole new field, you'd want to hire someone who'll be attuned to all the possibilities. And there are other jobs that place a premium on solidity, consistency, and longevity. For those jobs you need someone who is motivated most by what he needs. It's equally important to know what your own personal metaprograms are so that if you're looking for a job, you can select one that will best support your needs. The same principle works in motivating your children. Let's say you're trying to stress the virtues of education and going to a good college. If your child is motivated by necessity, you have to show her why she needs a good education. You can tell her about all the jobs that absolutely require a degree. You can explain why you need a foundation in math to be a good engineer or in language skills to be a good teacher. If your kid is motivated by possibility, you would take a different approach. She's bored by what she has to do, so you'd stress the infinite possibilities open to those with a good education. Show her how learning itself is the greatest avenue for possibility, fill her brain with images of new avenues to be explored, new dimensions to be opened, new things to be discovered. With each child the result will be the same, although the way you led her there is very different. Another metaprogram is a person's working style. Everyone has his own strategy for work. Some people are not happy unless they're independent. They have great difficulty working closely with other people and can't work well under a great deal of supervision. They have to run their own show. Others function best as part of a group. We call their strategy a cooperative one. They want to share responsibility for any task they take on. Still others have a proximity strategy.